No one can honestly say that Dragon Age the Veilguard was anything but a disaster for BioWare and EA. The only question is, why was it such a failure and who is responsible for this? We previously heard that the director for Dragon Age the Veilguard was let go from the company, or he decided to leave the company for his own reasons, whatever. But a lot of people, myself included, were saying when this was first announced that it feels like this person was fired, but they don't want to say so publicly because it would look bad for them to fire a trans person. And I'm pointing that out because this person made their identity basically everything about them. And you can see that kind of seeping into the actual game itself. And a lot of people are saying the game insisting on pushing politics above everything else is a large contributor as to why the game failed. And so far, BioWare really hasn't confirmed one way or the other, or what they plan on doing in the future with some upcoming releases like the new Mass Effect game. But now we're hearing that not only did they lay off the director for Dragon Age of Veilguard, but they're actually laying off a lot of other people at the studio who could be described as activists. And if that's the case, then it's possible that they might be learning their lessons. And when it comes to the upcoming Mass Effect game, maybe they'll kind of steer clear of that because, they can't afford to just keep dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into something that no one is actually going to play. I got this article pulled up right here from that Park Place. It's talking about what's going on and all the people being laid off from the company right there. There's a link to it in the description of this video if you want to check it out yourself. But let's take a look at it. So the headline, BioWare layoffs begin as EA purges Dragon Age the Veilguard activist developers. The BioWare layoffs have officially begun in the wake of Dragon Age the Veilguard's catastrophic failure, despite BioWare's initial restructuring announcement noting that it would be moving team members to other EA divisions and avoiding the word layoffs entirely. The reality has now become clear. Developers who worked on the Veilguard are being cut. And I will point out, though, that it's not necessarily unusual for a company like this to lay off a bunch of people following the launch of a game. Usually, if you're going to have two games like this being worked on, like you have the Dragon Age team and then you have the Mass Effect team, and then after the game gets launched, then you start moving people over to the other team in order to work on that one in the lead up to the launch of that game. So the fact that they're actually getting rid of a lot of people like this is a little bit unusual, but what's even more unusual is probably the people that they're actually laying off, people who have more of a prominence within the game itself, because usually those are the people who stick around the company and start working on the next thing, but that's not the case. Like I said, the director of it chose to leave the company, or at least that's what they're officially saying. Like I said, I think he was fired from the company, but also other people who have prominent positions are leaving the company as well. This comes shortly after Veilguard director Corinne Bush exit, which was framed as a voluntary departure, though few believe the disgraced director left by choice after overseeing one of the most disastrous releases in BioWare's history. Just yesterday, BioWare released a statement in a post on the studio's official blog. Studio General Manager Gary McKay announced that the company is shifting its focus entirely to the next Mass Effect game, effectively sidelining Dragon Age after the latest installment's disastrous reception. And one of the things when it comes to Dragon Age is, or big launches like that, usually there's some people working on it, supporting it, releasing updates and other things like that. But they already announced that they're cutting off all that stuff entirely. They're basically just abandoning the game because, there's no one playing it. So why bother supporting the game and releasing further updates to it and other content if no one's even going to play it? So that's why they're just cutting it off right now. Which is saying something to just how badly the game actually performed if they spent so much on it and they're not even willing to even give it an extra shot, or hoping that people would actually come on board if they release more content for it. Given this stage of development, we don't require support from the full studio, McKay said. We have incredible talent here at BioWare, and so we have worked diligently over the past few months to match many of our colleagues with other teams at EA that had open roles that were a strong fit, but apparently he didn't mean all of their colleagues. And then it kind of goes into various people working at the company who you could describe as activists that are going to be let go. And like I already said, some of them have prominent roles within the organization. Some of them are announcing that they're leaving over on Blue Sky. So the fact that they're on Blue Sky kind of tells you, I'm going to say everything you need to know about them, but it does kind of shine a light on what their leanings are when it comes to this sort of thing. So anyway, each paragraph just goes into various people. Like I said, you can check it out yourself. The layoffs didn't stop there. Daniel Steed, a producer who worked on Star Wars: The Old Republic. So again, where is it? The latest development further highlights the fallout from the Veilguard's commercial disaster. EA had projected that the game would sell over 10 million copies across its lifespan, and by some estimates, they say they needed to sell that many in order to just break even with it, with how much money they actually spent producing it. Instead, it barely managed to engage 1.5 million players, with reports indicating over 30,000 returns and widespread retail discounting. And this is something I was thinking during the lead up to the release of this. I thought the game was going to do better than what it did, because even though it looked terrible, I figured since Dragon Age is a long established franchise, this is a major studio, that it would actually do better than that. But this was kind of one of those games that just goes to show even long-standing franchises aren't immune to, gamers' blowback. If people have basically said enough's enough, if your game's just going to push a political agenda over everything else, then we're not interested in it. And the Veilguard is basically, I want to say, the canary in the coal mine, because we've already seen these signs for years now when it comes to other smaller releases. But this just goes to show that even these major franchises aren't immune to this sort of thing. GameStop recently slashed the price of brand new copies to $24.99, a staggering 65% drop from its launch price of $69.99, and tanked its trade-in value after just 1 week. It's a clear sign that demand has completely cratered, leaving EA scrambling to mitigate the damage. And that's one thing about the trade-in value too, and that's something that we saw pretty soon after the launch of the game. You saw trade-in value for it was pretty low, and you can buy used copies pretty cheap, which indicates that there's a lot of used copies available right there, because people bought the game, started playing it, didn't like it, and took it back, which just goes to show how bad the game actually was. The BioWare layoffs are a direct response to the studio's failure to connect with players, as Veilguard prioritizes identity politics over compelling storytelling and world building. And that's not even just speculation or anything like that. I mean, that's pretty much stated by the people who are working on it, that was their goal, was to use this game as a platform to push their own agenda. And gamers just really aren't interested in that sort of thing, especially the manner in which they implemented it, I'm sure you've all seen the clips floating around online with just very clunky dialogue that doesn't sound like it belongs in this sort of fantasy RPG world. It sounds like it's something that you would hear at a liberal arts college, but that's one reason why a lot of people, even if they are more receptive to this sort of thing and they are more politically aligned with the developers of it, they just didn't like the game because it just how ham-handed it was actually handled. Fans rejected the game's tone and lack of depth, leading to its financial collapse. With the developers responsible now being shown the door, EA appears to be acknowledging that this direction was a mistake. And I also just want to point out, having this type of stuff in a game isn't what makes it bad. What makes it bad is it not only prioritizing it in a manner that doesn't feel genuine to what you're doing, but it's also stuff like this just kind of indicates that this is the direction the studio is actually taking everything. And what I mean by that is they're not necessarily hiring the best people for the job. They're hiring the best people who also check the right boxes for them. And when you do that, and when you're narrowing down your potential applicant pool to just people who check the right boxes, well, then you're going to have a lot of other issues. So when people say oh, well, this isn't bad because it had woke elements in it or DEI elements in it, it's bad because there was a lot of bugs in it, or the writing was poor, the mission design wasn't very good, and things. It's yes, all that stuff is true, but it's true because the people working behind the scenes on the game weren't the best people for it. And when you see stuff like this within the game itself, it's just kind of an indicator of where the studio is actually at. Now, you can have these sort of things in games and still make a good game, and a game that I wouldn't consider necessarily woke. But usually in this day and age, when you hire people like this, if they're more of an activist type, then they're also going to carry that over to what they're doing in their hiring practice. Now, if you have an activist director, but they're still willing to hire good people for the job and kind of put their own activism on the back burner for that, then I suppose that's fine if it doesn't seep into the final product. But apparently when it came to this, it did. And that's why BioWare is trying to correct course and actually get rid of a lot of the people that were working on this game, because they just need to clean house and actually bring in better people moving forward. At the same time, BioWare has assumed that fans, that the next Mass Effect is in the hands of veterans from the original trilogy, including Mike Gamble, Preston Wadamanuk. I'm sorry, I butchered that. Derek Watts and Paris Lay. Unlike Veilguard, which alienated its core audience, its announcement might signal a return to form for the franchise, but there's no guarantee of that. And that is true. Like I said earlier, that maybe they were just kind of getting rid of a lot of people because they're cutting off the Dragon Age stuff right now and they don't have a plan to work on something in the future. So no need to have people around working on the next Dragon Age game. So they're just getting rid of them and they're just focusing on the Mass Effect team. It's also a way of cutting costs because they need to recoup some of the losses that they had for the launch of Dragon Age: The Veilguard. But maybe it is a signal that they are willing to kind of change course and put a lot of that stuff on the back burner and not make it the focus of their next Mass Effect game. Now, we saw that kind of play out when it came to the last Mass Effect game, Mass Effect Andromeda. And even though that game sold okay, it was kind of a mediocre game for fans, as you can see over here on Metacritic right now. So maybe they're willing to actually, I mean, the thing about Mass Effect Andromeda is it did have a lot of these elements within it, but got to keep in mind it was released at a time where people were kind of roll their eyes at this stuff and be like, okay, I didn't really care for this, but whatever, I still want to play the game. But we've seen from Dragon Age to Veilguard that people are not willing to put up with that now, and they're a lot more sensitive to this sort of thing. So if there's any hint of DEI elements being a focus of Mass Effect moving forward, then I think we're going to see a similar result as we saw with Dragon Age of Veilguard. But I think maybe BioWare understands that, so they're trying to change course, or at least not going to make it as prominent as what we saw with Dragon Age in the lead up to the launch of it. I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens right now, because we won't know more until we see more for the new Mass Effect game. But I think getting rid of a lot of these people is a good sign. So let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Do you think BioWare is going to learn their lesson from this, or do they think they're just going to double and triple down on their failures? And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.